Excerpt from Satirical History of Virginia. New all too true blue alternative state histories. Time immemorial. Indians and creepers and turkeys. Virginia was full of creepers before anything else. Then came the Indians. Then came explorers from Europe, such as Spaniards who came poking around in the 1500s. A century later, the Pilgrims on the Mayflower had actually first intended to settle in Virginia, but a combination of faulty navigating and bad weather caused them to veer north to New England instead. This may have proved good for the Pilgrims, actually, because there were more Indians in Virginia than there were in New England at the time, and had they stopped in Virginia, they would have felt obliged to invite more guests to their annual turkey fests. When the Indians heard about American football, they got excited about choreographing touchdown celebrations. Here are a couple of them practicing their moves in anticipation of one of them scoring. 1607, Jamestown. While the Indians, of course, had been in the area since time immemorial, and various European explorers had been nosing about here and there since at least the 1500s, Jamestown was the first permanent British colony established in the United States. There was a short-lived settlement on Roanoke Island, which is now part of North Carolina, but was then part of Virginia. But, as mentioned, the Roanoke Island group did not last long. Then again, Jamestown didn't always look to be all that thriving either, as you can see here. 1640s, Washingtons and Lees moved to Virginia. After their defeat in the English Civil War in the 1640s, many Royalists from that country relocated to Virginia. Among them were Washingtons and Lees. These Royalist Washingtons would have a descendant, George of course, who would fight against the mother country of England, and these Lees would have a descendant who would oppose first England and then, a few generations later, another Lee, Robert E., who would fight against the United States itself. Summing up, it seems none of them ever seemed satisfied with the status quo, until they reached the status of being of the highest status themselves, that is. In the case of both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, a place in Virginia called, rather macabrely, Peppermint Patty Town would feature prominently in the differences of the opinion being settled. In fact, Peppermint Patty Town was where General Corned Beef Hash surrendered to Washington to end the Revolutionary War. In the Morse code message, translated into a telegraph below, you can see the redcoats, called that because their coats were red, from all the blood that had leaked out of the wearers of said garments, are playing a little tune for the bluecoats, who were called that because they sustained themselves on blueberries during the long military campaigns, and not all of them had napkins to preserve the pristine hue of their originally lily-white coats. 1676, the Bacon Rebellion. Virginia ham, being what it is, famous, even James Taylor grows it in his backyard, many Virginians got hot around the collar when a vegetarian from Berkeley, California, a known source of fruits, nuts, and flakes, tried to force them to give up meat, particularly when he specifically targeted bacon. This turned into an even bigger ruckus than the Revolutionary War and Civil War yet to come. Hardly anybody remembers them anymore. But the Bacon Rebellion? Those who fight for the freedom to eat bacon are still revered today, especially by those who wrap bacon around other meats and even top it with chocolate. The founding butchers fought that we might be free to eat bacon. Here is depicted, by means of a telepathic homophone, a scene from the conflict when the Baconites had suffered a temporary setback. The vegetarians have just burned up and down a smokehouse full of bacon. You can tell they are vegetarians by the pinched look on their faces and woe-begone countenances. 1700s, hospitable presidents and FFVs. Nowadays, California, New York, Texas, and Florida are the most heavily populated states. Back in the 1700s, though, Virginia was the most prominent of the 13 original colonies. Their main crop was tobacco, something which found favor with carnivores and herbivores alike, the two-legged ones, that is. Animals are not dense enough to consider the use of tobacco to be keen, cool, or groovy. Once the United States was formed, 4 of its first 5 presidents were Virginians, all but Massachusettsian John Adams. All of these first 4 Virginian presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, enjoyed rubbing elbows with Negroes and allowed them to stay on their property, provided they earned their keep, that is. After them, another 4 Virginians became president, but there have been none for a century now. Woodrow Wilson, elected in both 1912 and 1916, left office in 1921. No Virginians have sat in the plushest chair in the trapezoid office in the Casablanca since then. By the way, that last fellow was named as he was, Woodrow, because he would row if he had to, but since he was rich and lazy, he got other people to row for him, reminiscent of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. Yes, Virginia was so prominent for so long that there was even an acronym that was used to designate the most high-toned, highbrow Virginians of them all, FFV. This stands for Funniest Fellow in Virginia. It's kind of akin to being the poet laureate of a state or entire country, like Will Rogers in Oklahoma and Robert Frost in Vermont, for example. Those anointed as FFVs like to strut their stuff by attaching a patch to their duds so that everybody would know just who they were dealing with. It was plain but tasteful, as you can see below. 1775, Patrick Henry's speech in Richmond. One bloke who was never all that funny and thus never became an FFV was Patrick Henry. For one thing, it's never amusing to have a name which could be either 2 given names or 2 last names. It confuses people, especially government bureaucrats. They could never get it straight whether his tax bill should be sent to Henry Patrick or Patrick Henry. But enough about nomenclature and falling short FFV-wise. This gent in question gave a speech in Richmond in 1775 that was considered a real bell-ringer. He had no notes and thus spoke off the cuff. The problem was that he went on for so long and expended so much energy in his spouting that he got really hungry and feeling as if he was going to pass out if he didn't take some nourishment post-haste. Lifted his finger skyward and bellowed out, to no one in particular, but in a sense to everyone, "Give me liverwurst or give me death." Couple of liverwurst sandwiches and a pint of ale later, and Henry Patrick felt fine. Here you can see him at that dramatic event when he so longed for a sandwich of a particular sort. Give me liverwurst or give me death. 1781, Revolutionary War ends. The Revolutionary War ended in 1781 with the surrender of the 5-star British general in Peppermint Patty Town. This obscure general's name was Corned Beef Hash or something like that. His soldiers called him Loud Corned Beef Hash because he was always bellowing out orders. Do this, do that, tote that barge, lift that bale, fetch me a bucket of beer. See to what you're at, man. In a photo intended for the folks back home, here are the 2 sides making nice after having tried to cut each other's throats out for several years. 1831, Nat Turner's Uprising. In 1831, a man who had been bedridden for years after a terrifying fall off a colt suddenly got up, astounding all his friends and neighbors, who thought he was down for the count. As he rose up, they called this Nat Turner's Uprising. A dream image captured from an heirloom pillow shows his friends talking about this surprising turn of events. They are arguing about whether he was simply faking it all those years, so that he wouldn't have to go fishing with them when they invited him along for some angling. Some took this side of the question, some the other, as you can easily deduce from this picture below. 1859, John Brown at Harper's Ferry. In 1859, Harper's Ferry was in Virginia. Later, it would be in West Virginia. But there was no such place as West Virginia in 1859. It was not yet a state. Why bother about Harper's Ferry in the first place? This is where John Brown, lovingly remembered as the godfather of soul, went to recruit drummers for his band. Some dyed-in-the-wool, old-fashioned stick-in-the-muds who didn't approve of soul music claimed there was a law against recruiting drummers and arrested him there. Brown was captured by Robert E. Lee and J.E.B. Jeb Stuart. Also present at this police action were John Wilkes Booth and Thomas Stonewaller Jackson. Booth liked Virginia for its state motto, Sic Semper Tyrannis, which means Siccum Tyrannosaurus in Latin. Thomas Jackson was nicknamed Stonewaller because he got so wasted on Southern comfort that he would ride his horse into walls, even stone walls at times. Back to the important person. Here's a stylized memory map of Brown thinking up the words to his song, Say It Loud, I'm Brown and Proud. 1861. Virginia secedes from the Union. In 1861, Virginia grew tired of being part of the United States and seceded from the Union. This is a fancy-pants, euphemistic way of saying they quit. They took their quirt and went home. To make it official, they applauded the South Carolinians when they threw some pop rocks at the IRS tax office at Fort Sumter, near Charleston, South Carolina. This carbon copy of the Southerners' request for permission to quit the Union shows the upshot of this formality. 1861 to 1865, battles at Antietam, Molasses, Peppermint, Pattytown, etc. From 1861 to 1865, Virginia and some other of the warmer states engaged in some unpleasantries with the United States. These southern states were considered to be in rebellion. Virginia was the most populous of these rebel states. That being so, it is not surprising that many, if not most, of the battles took place in Virginia. To get all mathematical about it, 2,200 of the 4,000 battles were waged in Virginia. Some of the more well-remembered ones were fought at Antietam, Molasses, and Peppermint Pattytown. By way of example, here's a sketch of a warm-up skirmish at Antietam. 1862, Leviathan and Behemoth square off. During the entanglements of 1861 to 1865, some geniuses decided to spray Teflon on a couple of ships. They thought that this coating would make them not only easy to clean, but also impervious to cannonballs. When both sides had one of these ships, they decided to test their metal against each other. Afraid of sinking because of all the heavy metal, they agreed to fight it out on land, on a road. In fact, being called Hampton Roads, it was apparently more than one road. The Union members named their ship Leviathan. Not to be outdone with biblical allusions, the Butternuts called theirs Behemoth. The two sides circled around each other for a long time, seeking an advantage. Finally, one of them accidentally touched off a cannon, and then the other guys, nobody remembers who shot first, or even knew at the time there was so much smoke and confusion, started blasting away, too. They ended up blasting each other into the water, where they kept firing away until they both sank. Here they are in the thick of things, after mutually assuring each other's destruction by blasting each other from the road into the water. 1865, Appomattox. Just as some of the states had tired of being part of the country in 1861, they all eventually got tired of fighting about it. In fact, they came to the realization that they were flattered that the northern states loved them so much that they wouldn't let them leave. And so, in 1865, at Appomattox, where they had an automatic hard apple cider making machine, they finally vowed to become friends again and stop taking pot shots at one another. Here you can see Martin Sheen and Jared Harris shake hands about it and promise to let bygones be bygones. Sheen even said, "My bad," before chucking his scimitar into the pile. 1902, The Virginian, by Owen Wister. In 1902, the first novel in the Western genre appeared. This novel, The Virginian, was penned, or perhaps typed, by Easterner Owen Wister. The Virginian is the source of the quote, "When you call me that, smile," as depicted in this freeze frame from a 4D movie filmed in the year 2525.